Krisztina Rozgonyi wird die Keynote zu diesem Themenblock halten. Sie ist Senior Scientist für Kommunikations- und Medienwissenschaften an der Österreichischen Akademie der Wissenschaften und sie lehrt an der Universität Klagenfurt. Sie bringt sehr viel internationale Erfahrung mit und hat unter anderem für die EU-Kommission, die OSZE, die Weltbank als Policy-Expertin gearbeitet. Ich versuche euch mal vielleicht die Türe zu schließen, damit wir die Abbaugeräusche nicht so laut hören. Das halt ja alles ganz wunderbar da herinnen. Tolle Akustik. Krisztina Rozgonyi ist ehemalige Vorsitzende der ungarischen Telekommunikation- und Regulierungsbehörde und sie wird unter anderem auch über das reden, was schon angesprochen worden ist vorhin, nämlich der European Media Freedom Act. Begrüßen Sie ganz herzlich Krisztina Rozgonyi.
Schön. Danke sehr und also guten Tag und auch herzlich willkommen von mir zu dieser Session Wirb oder stirb, raus aus der Abhängigkeit. Wie gehört, mein Name ist Krisztina Rozgonyi und ich werde die Keynote zum Thema staatliche Werbung und Medienfreiheit auf Englisch halten, wenn Sie mir das zulassen, da dies meine erste Arbeitssprache ist und auch weil die meisten Quellen auf mich ich beziehen werde, auch auf Englisch sind. Abschließend bin ich gerne bereit, mich an der Diskussion in der von Ihnen gewünschten Sprache zu beteiligen. So, auf Englisch. I suggest that we start discussing the role of state-financed advertising, the focus of the session today, by laying out a few fundamental concepts and considering first the notion of media capture. The most common definition of media capture refers to a situation in which the media are controlled either directly by governments or by vested interests which seek political influence rather than profit. This is a definition by a scholar called Alina Hungiu-Pipidi, who is very much specialized herself in this area. These interests pursue media for political gains rather than public good, creating a situation where an unaccountable regime can flourish. It is a systemic governance problem where political leaders and media owners work together in a symbiotic but mutually corrupting relationship. Media owners provide supportive news coverage to political leaders in exchange for favorable government treatment of their businesses and political interests. I believe these features sound familiar to many of us, regular readers of the news in Austria. Media capture, according to top relevant scholars like Marius Dragomir, typically encapsulates at least four major elements. First, the capture of the media regulator. Second, the control of the public service broadcaster. Third, media ownership control. And fourthly, the use of state financing as a control tool. Today, our attention will turn to this fourth element, namely the role of state-financed advertising aimed at distorting media markets and the freedom of the media. The first symptoms of media capture began to be felt in Central and Eastern Europe in the early 2000s. A context in which already fragile media systems, freshly restructured and just launched in the media market economy, were first destabilized by the digital revolution, then hit by the global financial crisis, and finally preyed upon by oligarchs who rushed with the approval of their governments to fill the void by the exodus of the foreign, typically Western European media. Although this type of media capture is typical for Central Eastern Europe, there are clear signs and evidence at hand that several countries successfully imported such control mechanisms, learned from the lessons of their Eastern colleagues and political friends. These lessons typically more and more include the misuse of state financing to capture the press and the media. Now that we have set the broader framework of media capture and identified the major elements, we can zoom in and focus on the use of state financing as a control tool, specifically on state-financed advertising. Importantly, today, state advertising is an important source of revenue for many media service providers across Europe, contributing to their economic sustainability, thus a major pillar of media viability. Note, we will come back to this concept later. So the question, what does the picture of state-financed advertising in Europe look like? I would say not good. There are reported, and I quote from the European Commission's latest report, internal market barriers within the European Union and an uneven playing field resulting from the opaque and unfair allocation of economic resources, in particular from the allocation of state advertising, which may be used to favor and covertly subsidize certain media outlets that provide government-friendly views. We should also note that the European Union's dedicated alert system, the Media Pluralism Monitor, latest report, 2022, ranked the threats related to undue state advertising across Europe as one of the highest risks to media freedom and pluralism. Importantly, we should also consider that the regulation of this area is fragmented and limited in Europe. The existing media-specific measures and general public procurement laws may not cover all state advertising expenditures, nor offer sufficient protection against preferential or biased distribution to the detriment of legal certainty and with the ensuing risk of arbitrary or discriminatory decisions. So let us see what concrete situations these abstract risks and threats could lead to. So first, let us look closer. What could undue and opaque state financing bring to the deterioration of media freedom in fact and in real? The privilege to speak here today is also connected to the fact that I happen to be Hungarian and someone who was deeply involved with the Hungarian media policy making and regulation before the illiberal turn of the country and before these types of media control practices became the norm. I quote again from Nárius Dragomir here. The Hungarian example is relevant because they don't even need to beat or kill anybody, since they created an environment where independent journalism is totally squeezed to the fringes of the media, basically without any impact, to a great extent with the help of state-financed advertising schemes. So how it has all started back in 2010. Once upon a time, there was a businessman called Lajos Simicska, we can't even recall his name anymore, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's old friend, who played a key role in inventing and running a rogue scheme. People loyal to him or blackmailed by him were embedded in the state administration, authorities, and public companies, all of which granted their advertising budgets, importantly through public procurement procedures, to PR agencies and media buyers, also mostly linked to the same businessman. These agencies spend the money in media companies controlled through holdings and trustees. The money, billions of Hungarian forints of taxpayers' money, circulated within this circle, basically uncontrolled by anyone outside the scheme. Researchers and very few fearless investigative journalists have tirelessly studied the operations and the nitty-gritty details of this diabolic system run over a decade, and described this type of misuse of state funding as an instrument of market distortion, censorship, and building an uncritical media empire aligned with the government. They have also argued that this practice can be viewed as part of a broader set of instruments deployed by the illiberal states and hybrid political regimes to consolidate their hold on power. Where did this all go? Today, 86% of the media market in Hungary belongs to government-allied outlets, including print and online press, digital nomad media, and well-established television broadcasters, and 100% of the terrestrial radio market. And importantly, I'm not even referring to the fully captured propaganda, public rather call it state media of Hungary, nor to the government-controlled state news agency, but to the seemingly market-oriented media outlets. The conclusion of several international monitors and rapporteurs on Hungary that the freedom of the press has come to an end is deeply rooted in these figures and data. Now let us refocus our attention on the case of Austria. What do we know about state-financed advertising expenditure and then impact on media freedom? I would say, luckily, quite a lot by now. I am first and foremost referring here to the mentioned European Union's report, the Media and Pluralism Monitor's report on Austria, although I could also make reference to excellent journalistic revelations. I quote from the latest report. The extraordinary high amount of state advertising expenditures, about 5 times the amount of regular media subsidies, and the lack of meaningful transparency in the allocation criteria, mainly to the benefit of the 2 largest newspapers, was ranked as the highest risk threatening media freedom in Austria. And further, the details of the Economic and Corruption Prosecutor's Office, the WKStA, corruption investigations have exposed unhealthy ties between politicians, polling companies, and media organizations. These incidents have shaken public trust in the media and underscored the urgency of reforming the system of media subsidies. Importantly, currently there are no rules ensuring a fair distribution of state advertisements among media outlets in Austria. A recent academic analysis published by Medienhaus Wien also concludes that the state influences the market, its design, and thus the possibilities of journalism more strongly than ever before. I believe it is fair to say that the Austrian media do have a problem, and that the Austrian policymakers, legislators, regulators, and media stakeholders should legitimately be worried about the ways, the possibilities, and the means which could bring significant change to this situation. So I recommend that we start collectively assessing what possible solutions there could be with the potential of bringing change to the current, not encouraging situation of media market distortions through state-financed advertising expenditures. Professor Trappel already recalled that we should talk about the proposal for the European Media Freedom Act. This proposal, published the end of last year and debated heavily in Brussels and across 27 European Union member states right now, laid out new proposals in this area. There should be no surprise to recognize that the issue of state advertising and media freedom was put on the European policy agenda first and foremost because of Hungary, but also partly because of Austria. The European Media Freedom Act proposal set out new rules on the allocation of public advertising, Article 24, all of which will have a direct effect in all European member states in case this proposal will enter into force, since this is an act and not a directive. According to the proposal, public funds granted by public authorities to media service providers for the purposes of advertising shall be awarded according to transparent, objective, proportionate, and non-discriminatory criteria and through open, proportionate, and non-discriminatory procedures. Moreover, the national regulatory authorities or bodies shall monitor the allocation of state advertising in media markets. So let us summarize this proposal. According to the new rules, the ultimate guarantee of public use, of fair use of public advertising is primary in ensuring transparency. But would that be enough? Let us get to this question a little bit later. And what is a proposed solution in Austria against the misuse of state advertising? As noted previously, it was recommended to Austria that there needs to be significantly more transparency in allocation criteria and data management. The Austrian government might have listened to those recommendations and put forward a draft proposal on the Novelle des Medientransparenzgesetzes. I have checked the latest version available to the public. The update was, I think, the 30th of March. And it seems that the aim of the new legislative proposal concerning state advertising is die Einführung einer umfassenden Definition der Bekanntgabepflichten, Werbeleistungen, first. Second, Entfall der bisherigen Bagatellgrenze für Werbeaufträge. Thirdly, Verankerung zusätzlicher Veröffentlichungs- und Berichtspflichten. And lastly, Vorgaben an die Regulierungsbehörde über die Art und Weise der Veröffentlichung. The amendments are to enter into force as of the 1st of January 2024. I certainly do not want to go into details of this legislative proposal, but I believe we will do that anyway during the discussion. Instead, I would suggest that we rather reconsider some of the fundamental concerns about the role of the state in media financing and draw conclusions together. Of course, also relevantly to the draft legal text. To do so, we should remind ourselves why the media needs any state intervention, including financial support. I suggest the media viability concept should guide us. Media viability requires that the overall economic and business environment provide conditions conducive for independent media, enabling journalists to perform its role as a public good. So the question we should consider today, and the Austrian policymakers and legislators specifically, is about how we conceptualize media viability and what role we would foresee for the state in providing for and enabling the financial environment. I believe we need to make a conceptual change at this point and rely upon the notion of Medien as the Infrastruktur der Demokratie, as put forward by renowned media scholars such as, for example, Matthias Karmasin. If we agree with this theoretical approach, and I certainly do, then the state financing of the media should be seen as an investment in the infrastructure of democracy and enabling the viability of such investments. Accordingly, state financing would not be about subsidizing a struggling industry, but long-term investing to achieve the highest possible quality of public good. Thus, the question whether the European Media Freedom Act proposal or the novella would be good enough instruments for the control and regulation of state financing will have to be assessed against conceptually different indicators, such as what enables value creation in Austria and what is of value in terms of democratic politics. I strongly believe that this conceptual step change is the minimum basis for constructive discussions ahead. Consequently, there are several questions we need to think about. As mentioned before, the core regulatory concept of the Media Freedom Act and of the novella is about more transparency. But would that be enough? I would say definitely not. Transparency would still allow for lump sum, non-value driven financing and the further operation of the Kieskanne system. Furthermore, transparency would not even touch upon the fundaments of deeply rogue financing schemes, such as the Hungarian, because it would not guarantee an objective, proportionate, and policy-driven distribution of public funds. Another urgent and debated question is who should be in control of the use of state financing. Under the European Media Freedom Act proposal, it is the national regulatory authorities. In the case of Austria, it's either the Com Austria or the RTR or both. This is also an open question, who will have to monitor the allocation of public advertising in the media markets. This solution would be highly problematic for at least two reasons. First, it would inevitably lead to the politicization of regulation and put the national regulators under constant political stress. Moreover, without the conceptual change about the function of such type of state financing, the national regulators not be able to consider public value and democracy-driven investment conditions. So lastly, I recommend that we not only consider the problems of state-financed advertising, but reconsider state financing in its entirety, including the urgent call for the reform of the media system, of the media subsidy system, namely Förderungen. Let me recall again. Investition in die Infrastruktur der Demokratie. This concept asks repeatedly, what is to be financed by the state and in what manner? It is quite evident that this should relate to what enables value creation in Austria and what is valuable in democratic politics. And that is more or less professional, high quality, and in every respect, independent journalism in the greatest plurality, which admittedly does not always have to be limited to classic media and reporting formats. This argument is fully aligned with the recommendations of the media pluralism rapporteurs and other international reports. At a minimum, it would need an ending of the Gießkanne and the change to impact-oriented funding according to strictly selected and policy-oriented criteria of quality, public value delivery, and innovation. In conclusion, let me say this. Several forces are striving for change right now across Europe, East and West. I believe this is a really good momentum, and it's precious and rare, and it should be used for the utmost possibilities. Thank you for your attention.